I'm on this high from the NALI conference, the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives, where I plugged this Hollow Bunny podcast, but I didn't need to because so many people say they listen. And I said, thank you for listening to our dumpster fire of a podcast. And I mean that
Don't.
lovingly. No, I mean it
Don't put that.
lovingly.
Humility. False
It
humility.
it's I love it. I love our dumpster fire. I think it's great. I think it warms people.
I don't know. I'm not in love with the description at all. And so
I'm not either.
so yeah, so
Okay,
see,
that's
it's
two
two
against
against
one.
one. So
God,
Ted,
that's so funny. All right, well, so should I jump right into the intro here, and then we'll just
well,
talk about
what's
what
our
we're going to talk
topic?
about?
What?
It's what does eroding agency? It's about agency. It's the article you sent.
Oh fuck!
Okay.
It's called withdraw.
Challenge me that this is not a dumpster fire. Challenge me one more time. You don't even know what topic. You pitched the topic. You don't even know what the topic is.
The Hollow Buddy. And we all feel hollow sometimes.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Hollow Bunny Leadership Podcast. I am Kristen Zeman, and I am here with my dynamic and daring co-host, Sylvia Moyer.
Ooh.
Yeah, you like that? You're dynamic.
Yeah.
You're very dynamic. And you're also very daring, because I really thought about that during my alliteration. I thought, daring, does that fit you? And you are. You're a risk taker.
Yeah. Like,
You don't think so?
I am
Would you
a risk
disagree?
taker because I fail. I suck at more things than I'm successful at. I don't know.
That's what
You
I'm
know
talking.
what? You may be right because my mom actually said my fear meter, my fear sensor is broken.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
she's like, who are you? Why do you do all
Listen,
this
Syl.
crazy? Yeah.
So I don't just pull these words out of my bum. You know what I mean?
Oh.
I really contemplate over them before I describe you. So just know that these are intentional, they are deliberate, and
Okay.
hey, listen, listeners. We're former police chiefs, but the Hollow Bunny podcast is not just for cops. This podcast is for anyone interested in talking about life and leadership and, quite frankly, some nonsense, and particularly lessons that we have learned about all of the above. And these lessons fill up the Hollow Bunny metaphorically. So today's topic is leaders feel like their agency is eroding and they're starting to withdraw. So the question that we're going to wrestle with is this actually happening? Or are some leaders choosing to step back because leading is hard? I don't know. What do you think, Sil?
Leading is hard. And when we feel kind of our agency eroding, there are some people, it's totally natural in life to have moments where you withdraw. Uh, we're not neuroscientists. I know a lot of people think we are. We're not
Oh, God.
neuroscientists, but we understand the amygdala and this fight or flight. We understand about being emotionally regulated. We know when someone's dysregulated. So, okay, so withdraw, it may be okay in little spurts of time. It may be episodic, right? That there's something that causes you to be introspective, to really pause, to be still, to really consider. But when it becomes chronic or it affects your agency, the organization, I should say, then that's a problem, right? So we're giving you permission to have little moments to withdraw, to really take stock or whatever you're going to call it. But where
Yeah.
it becomes problematic is where it affects your organization. And so why does it
Yeah.
even occur?
So that's what I kind of wanted to get to is, I love reading some of these articles, especially from the Harvard Business Review, because they're very academic based. But then my brain immediately goes to, okay, explain this to me like I'm five. And so I went with, what does eroding agency even mean? And so I think that was exactly the question that you posed is, what does that mean? And I think in real talk, in real terms, it's that leaders feel like their decisions are constrained. They feel like risk is punished more than rewarded, which is so true. I think public scrutiny is absolutely relentless. And I think that bureaucracy, politics slows everything down. So I think these are real considerations, but I guess my pushback to it is that it's not that your agency has disappeared, because that to me, that gives people permission to check out. Like, you have no more agency because of these things. And I think it just means that it's uncomfortable. Is leadership freaking hard? Yes, exactly. That's why not everyone should do it, right?
Yeah, and really, what we were studying was when leaders' outcomes feel decoupled from effort. And so all the effort, all the sacrifice,
Decoupled.
everything's moving forward, but there's this destabilizing factor that was offered. And that destabilizing factor is all this pressure. The pressure
Mhm.
itself is actually what causes the destabilization. So it's a natural human response to then find a way to withdraw, to collect, to take stock, to consider, to ruminate, or whatever. And the difficulty is that the breakdown is the link between the action and the consequence, right? The erosion of meaning. The meaningful work is lost. The meaningful kind of response to the work is lost because of all that pressure. And
Yeah.
and what is offered is that it is normal under sustained, relentless kind of condemnation and difficulty. It's normal for people to kind of pull back. And what we're offering is not only permission to do that, to withdraw a little bit, but then in that withdrawal, to then determine, what am I going to do to recommit and to show up for my organization in a way that they deserve to move them forward. So we're talking about the individual, we're talking about the response, we're talking about the external pressure, and then what does it mean to the organization, right?
What made you choose the word decoupling?
Ted's neighbor. Just
I just, I went on a little vacation there when you were talking. I'm not gonna lie, because I was like, decoupling. That's
oh, for the
like, you know what else I like besides decoupling is like entanglement. Like, we have
oh, I
to get
love.
out of our, have to get out of our entanglement. Okay, I'm coming
Yeah,
back. I'm coming
I
back. I
use the
have,
word disentangle quite a bit. We're going to
oh,
disentangle. It
is
just
that
for
real?
me, it's
Is
like
that a
this.
real word?
It is to me.
Disentangle. I
We're
like
going to
that word.
disentangle.
Yeah,
Yeah, I used that with
decoupling
someone recently.
and disentangle. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. I'm back.
How was your vacation? Did
Oh
you
my
put in
God, it
for
was so
leave?
great. It was so great. No, I just left. I just ghosted right there. Okay, so I do think what you were saying, I was half listening. So I think that what we're saying here is that the reality is leadership has changed. It is like
Sure.
this, there are reasons for people to lose their agency and to check out. But so I don't think that I can completely dismiss the pushback that I gave, is that your agency has not disappeared, because there are some really important challenges that we have to consider. And one, in this particular era, we have social media, which means instant judgment.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
we didn't have that before, and we are old enough to have lived in both worlds. And that means that transparency demands are a lot higher for leaders, and they have to answer to it, not just in their organization, but beyond. And that, as I mentioned before, I think the legal and the political pressures are real. And, and especially in policing, this, of course, is for this topic manifests in all organizations, but in policing especially, the margin for error is razor thin, because lives
Good
are
point.
on the line. And that should give also people a little bit of solace, is like, sometimes things are not that deep. It's like we make them out to be, we catastrophize. But did you die? I have that t-shirt that I wear all the time. Did you die? And it's funny, because, not funny, haha, but in policing, it's like, that's a real possibility for the worst possible outcome. And so, I think things are not that deep. And so, just considering, the job didn't get easier, but it most certainly got more honest for all of us, because of the transparency that goes with our jobs.
Yeah, and I think what you just touched on is an important piece, and that's this chronic pressure, right? It's this chronic pressure, chronic scrutiny because of the times in which we live and lead. And so the call to action, and we talk a lot about this, about resilience. And under chronic pressure and this relentless lens in which people view leadership, particularly in public service, being resilient is not just the answer. It's one piece to the answer. And what we've seen, you and I have witnessed, is those people under chronic pressure have kind of a couple responses. One is they completely withdraw. They cancel commitments. They're like, I just can't deal with this right now. This is too much for me. They become more rigid, more reactive. We talk about that a lot. But then the opposite is also true that we've witnessed. People under relentless pressure, they become more fear-based and black and white in their thinking and directive because it gives them a perceived sense of control. And both are total defensive strategies, right? In terms of the psychology of human beings who are in leadership positions. Well, all human beings, really. I think there's a call to action here. When one is feeling that relentless pressure, being resilient is one piece, but it has to take a really more rich or richer, more appropriate grammar form, right?
Yeah.
But
you make a really good point.
Well, there's a first. And so this ain't no dumpster fire, just saying. But retreat, I think we need to pay attention to in self and in others. And retreat needs to be focused on with retreat and withdrawal.
Yeah, because I think that's where it gets dangerous. Leaders are allowed to be frustrated. They're allowed to, especially with the realities that we've just talked about. But where it gets dangerous is the exact same thing that we have found with our workforce, is that disengagement is at an all-time high. They say, 50% of employees are disengaged, with an additional 16% that are actively disengaged. And those are your organizational terrorists. And so when leaders withdraw, that allows that to permeate as well. And so withdrawal looks exactly like you said. It's not as overt for a leader. And I think that's where some leaders can get away with it, with that whole withdrawal looks like playing it safe and avoiding hard conversations. And one newsletter that I just dropped was a result of, I think it was in Connecticut, where the first lawsuit was filed against a company that had a women's leadership forum where 250 of their employees attended. That's 12% of their workforce. And so they had a women's leadership conference. Cool. And a male who wasn't even at the event filed a lawsuit. This is the first federal lawsuit filed on behalf of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason that I bring that up is because, first of all, this lawsuit will never prevail, but what it will do is it will give weak leaders, cowards, I'll just call them what they are, the ability to, quote, play it safe. Well, we can't have any women's conferences anymore. And when that is not what is best for your people, your organization, because it has been proven time and time again that when every single employee feels as though they belong. But I use that as an example because that is a great example of playing it safe, deferring to policy, or we may get in trouble. And the legal arm of our department says we can't have this conference when we know that's not the right thing to do. So, some people convince themselves that withdrawal looks like safety or professionalism, and that's why it's so insidious.
Well, and it's horrible. So I'm going to say policy and law are the floor.
Yeah.
It's the floor. It's the bare bones floor. Yeah. And culture, climate in an organization is above policy.
And judgment. Yeah.
Yeah. And where it just disgusts, well, there are a number of things that disgust me about that story that you gave. And bravo to that company for doing it, because the actual reality is men and women are different. Let's just admit that. And then what you're kind of signaling is this charge against this external pressure, when this external pressure becomes so unbearable, there are some companies that are going to be reactive. They're going to make a sudden decision. They're going to restructure. They're going to do something totally different that is wildly off course from the values and the mission, right? And so I just think it's an escalation of reactivity. And you and I have talked about before, one of the most compelling quotes for me by Viktor Frankl is, between stimulus and response, there is this space. And in this space lies your freedom. It lies your choice. So we get a lot of stimulus, and where we err is in the response, right? In that space before our response. And what we're saying is, okay, you can respond, you can withdraw a little bit, but you can't withdraw to the point where it makes you reactive to the external and internal pressures of the organization you're leading, or the division, or the unit. And
I don't want to let leaders off the hook here, because there are some leaders who are the victims of these kinds of circumstances. But not everyone is a victim here, because there are some leaders who don't want accountability.
Then they're not a leader.
Precisely.
Then they're a person in a position. Right?
Yeah, there are some leaders who don't want the heat. They don't want to make decisions that could backfire. They don't want any scrutiny. So that's what I'm saying. I want to make a distinction here, is that and I'll take away the word victim, because I think that's what you just got some energy around, is that what I was going to say is that, like, there are circumstances that make leadership difficult. And that is why some people start to withdraw or feel like they've lost their agency. So let's not call anyone a victim, because leadership is a choice. My point is that there are a group of people that just refuse to step into the heat. And in that whole notion of, when you are a leader, it may not be your fault, but you are responsible. And that, to me, carries a lot of weight with it. So there are a lot of leaders that don't want to make decisions because they are afraid that they could backfire. So eroding agency, it becomes a convenient narrative, is all I'm saying. And okay, I'll leave it with this question, or maybe, this is, I guess, a question that I would say is, if you feel like you have no agency, then you need to ask yourself, what decisions are you avoiding?
Right. And there was this other piece. What are you avoiding? And there's this other piece that you and I have really kind of circled around, and this is negative capability. This leadership capacity that's come into our field of view recently, and that is that there are leaders, and those that really are needed in this climate today are those people that are steady because they know they can tolerate, and they've demonstrated that they can tolerate not knowing something, maybe that the roadmap no longer makes sense. There's contradictory data, there's unresolved tensions, there's external pressure, all those things. They're not frustrated by a lack of coherence with where they're headed and all this external stuff. And they can withstand, they can tolerate not knowing, they can tolerate the pressure without totally collapsing and withdrawing. And we kind of touched on that on our previous podcast, that, there are a lot of people that their life, their backstory of trauma, their difficulty, and they're leaning into difficulty and building that capacity has led them to a place where they have an increased capability to withstand the negative and the pressure and the not knowing, the incoherence. And that is where a lot of leaders fail. They crumble. So, I wonder if there was a magic elixir, it would be to help leaders build this capacity and this negative capability, given all the difficulty that's out in the environment now, right? And we kind of talked about that with my golf game, with dude that was losing his marbles and staying in too long. But I think that was, and I've really had this reckoning, Kristen, with I stay in too long because I built such a capability of sitting in the crap. And that I don't need to, and that doesn't serve me. But what we're saying is leaders building this capability is really, really important. And the first part I would suggest is part of this thing you're building about blindness, awareness, and reckoning. And so having a reckoning with the pressures, having the reckoning with the map and the not matching the terrain that you're driving your organization forward, that is part of building this capability. So I think you're onto something super, super interesting in your reckoning piece.
Yeah, you just actually reminded me of a story that I just heard at the recent Nolly conference. I went to hear Chief Deanna Cantrell, retired, tell a story, and this story illustrates exactly what we're talking about here. Is this learned helplessness in leadership? Is that over time leaders stop trying to influence outcomes? So she tells a story when she became the new chief in a organization, a brand new organization to her, and she learned from the command staff that there was this particular officer who was disengaged, a malcontent, but he was a loud malcontent. And so she said, what's wrong with this guy? And, they said that, he is become this problem, right, in the organization. And she said, and I loved this so much, is how can we love him again? That was her first question, because at one time we loved him. And how can we love him again? And then she didn't stop there. She asked another question. And by the way, who is this person's sergeant, direct supervisor? And a hand went up. And who is this person's lieutenant? And I loved that because she tapped into attempting to influence an outcome. But what we do is over time, we normalize disengagement and we accept these constraints as fixed. And I was listening to her presentation, and I loved that. And it's actually what I wrote my newsletter about that will drop on Monday, because it affected me so much, is that how many times do we just let it happen? We let them sit on the shelf and they're dusty. And then as leaders, we just say, hey, this is just how it is. And what that actually says to me is that is just a leadership failure. You don't get to check out. And so to me, that story illustrates this: is we have to influence outcomes as leaders. And you don't get to say, I'm losing agency. I can't do it. I have no control.
Right. And the first part of that is to build this negative capability, is to acknowledge and accept that, hey, maybe the way I've always done it isn't working in this environment. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is that you don't get to disengage when it comes to human beings. Right.
Right.
And to constantly interpret kind of how you're showing up and how your prior methods may not work. What's fascinating about this is Deanna Cantrell, this retired police chief, tells a story where she didn't start out loving people. She was hardcore task. And she was called on that. So her tried and true method of moving forward didn't work. And then she landed in a place where she began demonstrating love and kindness as part of, or an associated piece, a coupling with her tasks, right? And and what she did was then she started developing that capacity and that kind of lane to love people. And then she asked that question. And wow, for a leader to ask that to cops, ooh, that's a gutsy sister.
For sure. And while we're on the subject of Deanna, she really was rocking the Brandy Carlisle vibes for me. So we're gonna put a picture on YouTube and we're gonna side by side it, because but that was also my takeaway. I was having trouble concentrating because I was like, oh my God, she looks like a rock star right now.
She does. Maybe, the hair growing out and the whole, confident vibe. Yeah, sister's got some swagger. She's really bringing the swagger.
She told that story as well, and she self-diagnosed as an asshole, and I love that. Yeah. And then she had to learn empathy, But that's reclaiming agency. This is literally what we're talking about. Is we have control, and at some point we can very easily check out, give up, and go, what? I'm an asshole. This is just the way it is. But no, it's about meeting people where they are, and also realizing what part you have to play in all of this, and that it's not everyone else's fault. And that that to me is the reckoning moment. That is where you go, and this framework that I'm working with, you go from blind, and then you have a disruption that makes you aware. And in this case, her disruption was people telling her she was a seeker, and she asked for feedback. Am I an asshole? I keep hearing I'm an asshole. And she would ask people for feedback. And now she's aware, and you cannot go back to blind. And that is your moment of reckoning. That is your moment of truth and choice. You can do something about it, or you can do nothing about it. And that is the reckoning moment. And we're talking to all of you leaders who are listening, is that if you fight that urge, I can't do what I used to do. This feels harder than it should. Maybe I should step back. That's the moment. That is your moment of reckoning. That is the moment it's not the moment your agency disappears. That's the moment when it matters most, and that you need to buckle down and say, what can I do next to change this outcome?
Sure. And to examine the way you've approached it in the past and perhaps try some other things. I recall in 2020, when we were at the multi-agency command center, this quote came to me by Winston Churchill, and I'm not going to say it verbatim, but it was in essence this: only a foolish optimist would ignore the difficulty of what is before us.
That's right. Yeah, the crisis is coming.
It's coming. It's not just going to pass us by. So let's build our agency to show up in a way that we can be healthy, and we can look, listen, and act differently. Build the capacity for genuine resilience, withdrawal in short bursts if necessary, but we can never be crippled or paralyzed as leaders. We have to continue driving forward, even if the map that we are viewing doesn't match the terrain that we're operating in. And that's a really important piece.
For sure. And I just think the challenge here is to leaders is you don't necessarily need more authority. You need more courage.
Right.
And you're not being silenced.
Right. And withdrawal is not a leadership failure. It's a signal that you may be doubting your ability to shape your environment. You may be doubting kind of your role in driving people forward, but it's not a failure. Where it becomes a failure is where it's chronic. And it becomes something that is enduring. So we're saying, hey, leaders, if you withdraw for a hot minute, okay, withdraw and then do something with it. Mm-hmm. I think that's largely what we're saying.
That's right. You can't complain about the culture while hiding from the decisions that shape it. Yep. Yeah, hands down. Perfect. All right, so let's land the plane right there. This was a great session. Oh, I do have a question for you. This was posed to me by Chief Ron Salon. He said, can you be a hollow bunny with some solid pieces? Can you be, do you have to be a hollow bunny completely just, crumbly?
Ooh.
Yeah. And yeah.
Hey,
and
Ron.
I said, this great question, Ron.
And I say, Ron, yes, you can. You can have like a solid foot, like if you're really an academic or you're really a tactical kind of person, whatever, you can have little pieces.
Isn't that a great question? And well put, because I said to him, I said, I think so. I said, I think there could be some really solid bunny ears, but then that butt is hollow. And you just gave the concrete example though. And this is like where we have the competency, but perhaps we don't have the empathy to lead people. And we all know people like that. Some people should be in charge of people and some people should be in charge of things. So that would make someone a half hollow bunny. Okay. This has been really enlightening for me. Or half a solid bunny. Is the bunny half full
or half empty? Yeah. Oh, shitballs, right?
Yeah, shout out, Chief.
Way to go, Ron.
Shout
You're
out
a
to Chief
thinker.
Ronnie. Yeah, he's
You're
the best.
Thinker.
He's the best. Yeah. Yeah, Ronnie from Massachusetts. Shout out to our millions of listeners. All right, everybody. Well, listen, thanks for showing up today. As you all know, Ted Madden produces this podcast, and the song you're about to hear was written and performed for our podcast by my handsome and talented son, Jake, and his friends, Fabian and Zoe. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, please like it, please review it, tell everyone you know about it. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And if you don't like our podcast, move along. Maybe you're just partially a hollow bunny. I don't know. Keep filling your own bunnies and keep adding substance to others. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
when you look inside, what do you find? Are you content to fall behind when you lose your way and you fall still? Why have courage and get ready to fight the hollow buddy? When the way ahead is covered in smoke and you're tired and you're scared and you're losing hope, you'll open your heart and your eyes to see a challenge and a question. Why not me? To fight the hollow buddy. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're brave and kind, you'll be alright. If you fight the hollow buddy. When the challenge ahead scares you to death, you tame the imposter inside instead. To change the world, you've got to start small. It takes a leader to say, I don't know it all, and I know I'm gonna fall, but I'll pick it up and come back stronger, failing forward and moving onward, doing the hard thing and the right thing, forever fighting the hollow bunny. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're brave and kind, you'll be alright. If you fight the hollow bunny.